Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. I follow my guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Hello and welcome. I am so honored to have Senior Psychology Research Fellow and fellow registered dietitian nutritionist, Dr. Tatyana El-Kour, with us today. Dr. El-Kour, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tovar. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Me too. So Dr. El-Kour and I met at the APA conference, the American Psychological Conference in Denver. And I was blown away by her presentation, and then just learning she's also a dietitian. We're very rare in our field to be psychologists and dietitians. I knew I had to invite her on my podcast. So I'm going to read a little bit about Dr. El-Kour, and then we're going to get right into the questions. Dr. Tatyana El-Kour is a senior research fellow at the Media Psychology Research Center and a fellow registered dietitian nutritionist with over 25 years of experience examining how media, technology, and culture influence eating behaviors and health decisions. This is something I have been very interested in. She has led pioneering global research, authored more than 100 scholarly publications, and delivered over 500 workshops worldwide. Dedicated to bridging science and innovation, Dr. El-Kour's mission is to empower healthier, more informed communities by harnessing the power of media and technology. So you can see why I invited her on this podcast. We really are interested in ways that we can improve our health, and I think that we are not as aware of the influences that media play on us, and that's why I invited Dr. El-Kour. So welcome, Dr. El-Kour.
Thank you very much. I'm humbled by the introduction, and I'm really excited to be here again. I reiterate it. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Is it okay to call you Tatyana moving forward?
Of course, please do. Yes.
Okay. It's less of a mouthful.
Of course.
So I always start my podcast looking at inspiration, and I really want to understand what inspired you to dedicate your amazing career to exploring the intersection of media, technology, and eating behaviors.
You know, Supatra, from the beginning, I saw that food choices are never made in isolation. They're shaped by the stories and cues around us. And growing up between Amman and North America, I noticed how the same drizzle of olive oil was celebrated in heritage with my grandma, but it was also labeled as fat to avoid in US markets. And so later, I worked on community campaigns where well meaning messages sometimes backfired. And one urged families to cut oil completely, for example. Soon after, a mother told me that she'd stop cooking her favorite meal for her children because she felt judged by the ads. And so we reframed it, honor Tata's spoon, or one generous spoon at a time. And Tata means grandma in Arabic. So suddenly pride returns to the kitchen. Children are happy. The mom is happy. So that moment really cemented my path. Food is never just about nutrients. It's narrative. And media is just part of the meal.
Absolutely. So give me a little bit of a picture of how you went into this kind of research as far as what our messaging is. And messaging is from everywhere. It's from social media, it's from news, it's from what comes out of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So give me a picture of how you started to shape your research.
And one of the first was the health halo. I walking in the streets of London, I saw parents bypass fresh fruit for gluten-free gummies because the label sounded virtuous. And so I worked in Nairobi in Kenya, and children could sing every line of a sugary drink jingle before they could even read a nutrition label. and
Mm-hmm.
and another was the body ideal effect. In Cairo, for example, where also I worked quite a number of years, billboards of ultra lean models, didn't really inspire health. They pushed teens towards skipping meals, and research confirms that media exposure increases body dissatisfaction and even disordered eating risks. But then, with nutrition, diet fads grew. It had more layers. In the 90s, we had low fat messaging, which really clashed with olive oil culture like mine. So where fat was the heritage, the healthy fat was the heritage. And then you had low carb campaigns which clashed even with rice cultures, where rice symbolizes abundance and family, as in Central Asia and even Southeast Asian cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And then lately we had intermittent fasting, which is especially complex. It has deep roots in religious traditions, from Ramadan in Muslim culture to Lent to Orthodox fasting, and those have embedded meanings to them. But the way it's being portrayed in modern media, whether it's online trend or even in different supermarket packages, it's a magic bullet for weight loss and also for productivity. So
Yeah.
the missing piece is nuance. New research shows us that people who eat in very short windows, like fewer than 8 hours a day, actually have a higher risk of heart disease.
Mm.
And and the lesson is, diet trends aren't inherently good or bad. It's all about context. And so what inspired me really is the, for example, in the intermittent fasting ritual fasting carries wisdom and resilience, while intermittent fasting was really a viral hack, and it can be really risky when you strip it away from culture and also from science.
Oh, absolutely. It's so interesting. I just had Dr. Sachin Panda on my podcast, who basically discovered the light sensing cell in our eye, melanopsin, and he wrote the circadian code. And we were talking about this. And I think a lot of his research was actually subsumed into diet culture and kind of altered, because what
Mm,
he came, to understand, at least about, intermittent fasting, is that time restricted eating, meaning when you kind of follow your circadian rhythm, is, beneficial for our metabolism and for our health. But it was taken and really taken into an extreme with diet culture by making the fasting window smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And so today you're seeing people who are following the 1 meal a day diet,
yeah.
which I
Oh,
think is
man.
actually very harmful, very stressful, and very difficult to sustain. Oh my goodness. So we have so much to unpack here. You know, you gave me a picture of some of the patterns that you noticed in how media shapes our food choices. Do you have an expanded view on that, especially lately? Maybe even what we're seeing with the proliferation of protein recommendations. That's what I'm seeing so much of in the media lately that I find disturbing.
Absolutely. I mean, you see a lot of protein shakes being marketed for premenopausal and menopausal women, and that the secret is in the protein, even for women during in that age, disregarding her culture, where she comes from, and even basing a negative relationship to hormones. Hormones are
Mhm.
normal. It's a normal trajectory of a human body, and so building that kind of a negative connotation to it is something that is prolific, and it's on the media, and it's also being magnified. The other piece or the other trend I'm seeing is food pornography, where you see a lot of trends even on TikTok, where teens and even youth are just racing to eat a very large fatty meal or a very large healthy meal in no amount of time, with no respect to any health, or even with no regard to your audience or to who watches you. And it becomes a trend, and it's skewing the way we look at food portions, as another example.
Oh
And
my
then you have the
gosh.
self-diagnosis pieces with the TikTok. if you hear somebody talking about an anorexia or orthorexia or an eating disorder, and they become very interested and they start following to learn more about the tricks of trade and how I could do it, how I could get better at anorexia. And those aspects are really, really very harmful practices. And they're
Yes. And
threatening the way we're looking at media
oh,
and nutrition.
and I want to spend a really great portion on that in the second half of this
Yeah.
podcast for sure, because that is something that I, deal with all the time with my clients. That's a big reason why I wrote my book right there, Deprogram Diet Culture, because what we're seeing people follow online is very disturbing. And just back to the protein bit, I think it's very scary right now because I think all of these recommendations are based off of consumerism, and industries wanting to make as much money as possible. If you look at like the animal agricultural industry, it's an unsustainable industry because they're promoting such high levels of intake. And I think that they're doing that because they know that the resource is finite. We're running out of, land, arable land that the cattle can graze, that the livestock can graze. The prices are going to be rising, so they're trying to promote, especially animal protein, to with to levels that I think are really harmful to our health. Because when you look at research, um, consuming too much animal protein leads to all sorts of health complications. Would you agree that it's more market driven than health driven?
I mean, there definitely there is a market interest in that, but there is also a people. There is not only the food industry piece. There is also the technology piece.
Mhm.
So technology is benefiting from how people behave around the information. So if you are giving them a piece of information telling them that animal protein is actually good for them and that they need to ramp up their intake, you have AI behind behind your screens, you know tracking your behavior, looking, targeting your emotions, and even predicting how you are going to continuously be exposed and even relate to the message without thinking about it or analyzing it. And then of course there is the other piece where climate nutrition, at the climate nutrition nexus, where plant-based proteins have been heavily promoted, and that you will not be able to eat enough of the proteins from plant sources, so you really need the protein powder and you really need the different types of proteins. And that really was completely the opposite of the argument on the animal based protein. So we are even adding to the confusion of consumers, and I believe the behavior of industry has intertwined with our like own behavior as consumers with technology, has really added layers of complexity. So
Oh my
professionals
goodness.
like us as registered dietitians will need into upskill ourselves in technology, but also in understanding the industry behavior around such promotion and such products.
Yes, and that's why we need people like you out there doing this kind of research. It's amazing. So let me ask you this. How do cultural narratives and global differences influence the way people respond to food marketing and health messaging? Give me a picture outside even of the United States, what's happening.
Sure, absolutely. So culture is the soil, Messages grow when they honor it, and basically they fail when it's not honored. So
Mhm.
in Jordan, olive oil is heritage. So a low fat everything campaign would feel insulting. And so, but when you reframe it as you probably could measure with a particular spoon and integrate it as part of your lifestyle, the same piece of advice can be embraced. In cultures like in Japan, in Osaka, in Japan, students made a game of creating, rainbow colored bento lunches. And so they balanced through beauty and not restriction, and that was so powerful among students. So it
Mhm.
brought in the colors, but it brought in the balance without giving the restriction piece. So it's also how you frame the message with a cultural understanding. In Mexico City, for example, if tortillas are very popular, so if you tell folks to eat fewer tortillas, they would flip. But if you give them a message like can you share your first tortilla, or while filling your others with some beans and veggies, it would resonate more deeply. So and as global diet trends spread, culture always decides, and that's my experience. Every country I've been to, the key isn't about exporting one rule. It's about weaving health into the stories of people already, that the stories that they live by.
Oh, wow. Well, that is super powerful. And I love that story about Japan. I think that that's really just health forward, but positive. And I am all for anything that is not restriction oriented. How do you even classify what's happening in the United States? What is our cultural messaging? How are we either responding to negative or positive messaging? And how is that impacting our health?
I don't think there is one size fits all. I cannot say that we would be fair by treating all states equally. It really depends on the ethnic profile, on the cultural diversity. So, and then also on the variety of cultures that each area would embrace. And so, and you'll be surprised because with AI, there's a hyper personalization element. And so it's feeding into what you would like to get exposed to and also to engage with. But what's
Mhm.
happening in the United States now is if I may say, is a state of delirium. It's science being masked with trends, people not being able to take decisions, not influenced by many factors. Of course, technology is one, but then media is another, and the lack of professionals being there up front, understanding, where people to meet people where they're at,
Mhm.
if I may say so. One example is one study done by Duke that looked at reproductive health and also nutrition messaging. And so they asked women 10,000. They've analyzed 10,000 social media posts through Instagram, and they asked women, where did you get your information from? And the one key piece of information was from each other. They were learning how to insert IUDs. They were getting their nutrition advice from each other and from those videos. And then when you analyze all the video exposures, you looked at it, and maybe 1 in 10,000 was from a healthcare professional.
Yes. Yes. I
And so
have to
we're not
say,
meeting people where they are at. Yeah.
no, I would agree. And I've been a part of certain Facebook groups that are interested in the newest GLP-1s, GIPs. And I will have to say, just kind of observing these groups, it is in a sense kind of, they're giving each other nutritional advice, which often is filled with misinformation. And I think that that just spreads and grows, and it's quite frightening when you see that, that's how people are really kind of spreading this information. Give me a picture too of how all of these new technologies like social media, digital advertising, you're talking about AI, how have they changed the way we think about food and nutrition?
Well, they've turned food into performance. A meal is no longer just for nourishment, it's content.
Mhm.
So that's the key message that I'd like to come across.
Yes.
So a striking trend is the food pornography, the way they portray food with glossy, slow motion videos of gooey cheese pulls, oversized burgers, or even desserts drenched in chocolate. They're designed for sensory overload or not
Mhm.
balance. And so they often showcase fast eating in large amounts as if excess itself is entertainment.
Oh.
And so that's where the delirium that I spoke about is happening. So psychologically, these videos light up the same reward circuits as actual eating. But
Mhm.
unlike sitting at the family table, like what we normally do, viewers are immersed in an endless stream, appetite triggered again and again without satisfaction. So over time, this can normalize overconsumption and distort what normal portions look like. and
Mhm.
and then algorithms, there are many algorithms, okay, that are really observing and monitoring your behaviors, magnify it. So if you linger on one food reel, your feed can quickly fill up with more, from giant pasta bowls in Italy to viral eat it all in 10 minutes stunts. This micro choice becomes a macro pattern. in your
Oh my
digital
God.
environment, and it's hyper personalized. And culturally, there's a flip side to it. They can also celebrate, the food porn can also celebrate heritage. I've seen videos on online or reels, like Turkish baklava videos or even Japanese ramen prep. The danger comes when food is also stripped of culture and reduced to, to number of clicks.
Oh, absolutely. And I think if you were to combine that with what we know in terms of food technology and engineering, especially within ultra processed foods, they're, hyper engineered to stimulate our brain's pleasure centers for sugar, salt, and fat. And that really drives us to eat well beyond fullness. So you have that influence. And then we're going to talk a lot more about that. The other side, which is diet culture influence. And I think the interplay of these two things is creating a lot of confusion and a lot of shame. Would you agree with the shame portion? We're not supposed
Absolutely.
to eat this food. We're supposed to be over here dieting. And so, what is the person stuck between the two supposed to do?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the shame piece. And then
Mm-hmm.
what we're supposed to do is, I think the first step is become aware of the effects. Become aware of this environment, of what we're watching, and taking a pause. Just observing, taking a pause is one key element. And then there are various tricks where you at least normalize the content that you're watching. So if AI is trying to superfeed you with content, maybe you can say, I don't want any more of this, or minimize this. So you will be in control to actually take the control seat and navigate the system better, but also gear it towards what you would like to have as a balanced content.
Yes, but what about, say, younger people who don't necessarily have that savvy knowledge yet, and they're just becoming inundated? Their feed, they say that they're watching something diet culture related, orthorexia related, and then they start to see this more and more and more. How does a parent try to help their teen who might be consuming this content um, to their detriment?
Well, that's where the regulatory role becomes very, very important, and that you need to have filters,
Mhm.
basically. So, number one is really you need to have that filter piece, and secondly, with parents and even with youth or teenagers, while yes, they don't have the prefrontal cortex area as developed, so they cannot make the decisions that an adult could make, but we as adults or as parents, we need to lead with curiosity, not with control.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so they need to teach their children, what do they notice when they scroll, and how does it make them feel. And that builds aspects of literacy, media literacy, but also digital literacy. And then if you do it with joy, with some balance in between, and then a discussion with the family, this becomes even a more entertaining exercise. Combine it with emotions, like, with emojis, with every pause you could look at how the AI or the system is interacting with you, can really help to support resilience and even critical thinking. So it's a process. It's not a matter of a one day or a one show or even a one anchor or a one control or a regulatory control or piece. Research shows that youth, by the way, with strong cultural anchors and positive modeling, are more resilient to harmful media influences than
Mm.
than those who are not. So it's very important to have that positive modeling, but also to provide the cultural anchor. And what we're seeing, for example, in the United States, is that with where immigrant populations are really large, is that it's they're stripped away from their own culture, because the older generation, or the Gen Z and millennials, are completely different than their parents. They are not even associated with the original culture they came with, and
Mm.
that piece has really not helped parents, or it has created a gap between parents and children, and that gap needs to be addressed, and it cannot be just addressed simply by giving the algorithmic control. but it's also by.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I work with a lot of teens, young adults who are struggling with eating disorders and disordered eating. And this is also part of my book where I recommend that people look at their social media feed and just gauge how they feel when they're scrolling through it and really look at certain content. And if certain content is making them feel bad about themselves, making them feel like they need to diet, making them feel like they're not good enough, hide, block, unfollow all of that and gravitate towards things that bring you joy. Like basically my algorithm is puppies and kittens, Kevin Bacon playing, his guitar to his goats. I mean, you name it, whatever just is like a happy place for social media. And so there is a lot more control that you have over your feed. What do you think are like the biggest risks you see with the use of AI algorithms and targeted food advertising when it comes to disordered eating and body image issues?
I think the danger is precision harm. Traditional ads cast a wide net, but AI pinpoints individuals. So, for one teen, curiosity about fasting leads to endless skipping meals, basically, and then they feel good about watching even more of that. For another, a single carb cutting click fills the feed with content, demonizing rice or bread. And then the food, and then on the other side of the story, you see the food pornography reels, oversized burgers, 10,000 calorie challenges, etc., that can normalize the binge style eating. So the system doesn't know if you paused because you felt fascinated or anxious. It just assumes that you are interested. So the longer you pause, the more videos you watch, then this means we need to give you more. And so in this way, algorithms amplify both extremes, restriction and excess. And in disordered eating, this is really a horrific piece. And psychology tells us repetition even deepens internalization. So when restriction or binge style eating is repeated daily, it becomes your norm. So without safeguards, as you kindly mentioned, the hide, post, the block, normalizing the content even, AI risks turning food from a source of culture and care into a cycle of extremes or even shame and blame and guilt is really, and this would be really, really critical to address. The
Oh my
safeguards would be
gosh.
very important. So this
Yes.
process, understanding what happens is really important. That's the
Yeah.
first step. As you, I don't know about your experience, but working with youth and teenagers, if I tell them to hide, like, why do you want me to hide? My friends have watched this 12 times. I only watched it 5 times. And so you go into the argument of repetition, internalization, and what's happening. And so giving them the power through understanding is very, very important. So the risks
Absolutely.
are huge. Yeah.
Yes, and I would say teenagers are really responsible or responsive to, kind of sticking it to the man. If they know the man is the algorithm and it's trying to feed them stuff to, influence them and, um, you know, like influence their food choices and harm them, then they are more apt to reject that if they know it's a system that's coming in trying to harm them. So, teenagers out there, listen to that. That's the way you can stick it to the man. Don't let the algorithm control you and really base it off of your feelings. Like, I think our feelings are so important and we don't tap into them as much as we should. Our bodies tell us when something isn't right, and you get that awful feeling. Gravitate towards the stuff online that makes you feel good, makes you feel worthwhile, makes you feel like you are good enough. So, we're going to get into that a lot more in our second half, and we're out of time for this first half. But oh my gosh, Tatyana, this is so important for everyone to hear, mothers especially, teenage kids, but everyone needs to know how much AI is influencing us and maybe not in the best, most helpful ways. So, thank you so much for joining me for the first half of
Welcome.
this, Tatyana. And tune in next time for the second half of this amazing interview with Senior Psychology Research Fellow and Registered Dietitian Nutritionist, Dr. Tatyana El-Kour. Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Insight Podcast. Please remember, the contents shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Insight Podcast tab. And follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.